Welcome to WFPC Podcasting, your local source for the heart and history of Pike County, Indiana. And now, here's your host, Randy Harris.
During the time of the Petersburg tornado, now 36 years ago, there was a preacher who hadn't been here long, but he was a catalyst for helping to get things done. His stay here was a little more than most preachers, but the impact he and his family left continues today. We'll be back with Jeff Stratton right after this.
This is Kyle Hathaway with Hathaway Excavating and Rock Yard. We have the equipment and crew to take care of your earth moving needs, septic installs, and digging out what you need dug out. We also deliver rock, and we maintain and pump septics. We're just a couple miles away. Call Hathaway Excavating at 812-582-2646.
WFPC is sponsored by the Dustin Schnare Agency for Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance. Dustin and his staff, including Tyler Dillon, are right here in Pike County. It's face-to-face, and they guide you through the process of insurance. Whether it's home, auto, farm, commercial, or life, the Dustin Schnare Agency is here to help. Call the Dustin Schnare Agency at 812-766-1117 or stop in at the new office on State Road 61 at Petersburg. This program is sponsored in part by Dr. Clint Schultz with Schultz Eye Care in Petersburg. Schultz Eye Care offers comprehensive dilated eye exams, contact exams, a huge selection of name brand frames for glasses and sunglasses, and if you buy a pair, get a second pair at 50% off and a year's supply of contacts at 25% off. Schultz Eye Care is an independent office and are open through the week except Tuesday afternoon. The phone number is 812-354-9400. So you and I got here about the same time, and I got here in November of 1988. You were pretty close to that, maybe a month or two behind me.
Yeah, a little bit, just a little bit of time after that.
So you were pretty acclimated in the community. I mean, immediately. You were reaching out beyond. You and Gail came here with 3 kids,
right,
to take over the ministry at First Baptist Church.
Well, it was called Hornady Memorial at
That's
the time.
right. I forgot that.
Yeah, led them to instead of remembering the Hornady family, how about we become Baptists like we are? So.
You showed me an article that Andy Huring had written about you in April of 1989, saying you had been here a couple of weeks and you wanted the ministry to go out to the community.
Yeah, I commented that I thought that as it had been in the past, my ministry I thought would be bigger in the community than it was in the church, and I think it became that.
Wow, you were everywhere. I thought I was everywhere trying to get news stories, but wherever I'd go, there you were.
Yeah, you can't grow a church if you're not in the community. I mean, I was even in places like Friends Bar and Grill. I dropped a card off there when I first moved in and said I probably won't be sitting at the bar every night, but if you have somebody needs a ride home or somebody who really needs someone to talk to, give me a call. I'll be happy to run down here.
Great.
And got a few calls over the years.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Always have believed that.
So you were doing your thing. I was doing my thing. The rest of the community was doing their thing. And on May 18th, 1990, the water line in our well field which was parallel to the river.
Yeah.
Waters came in, created a scouring motion, broke the dam, and exposed that water line. We were without water. Do you remember
Oh
that.
my, yeah. In fact, I was part of a crew that helped lay the pipe from Hoosier Energy over to the water tank, water tower there on the north side of town.
So we had FEMA here for 2 weeks.
Yep.
And the day that you helped get that water line in place, that temporary line from Hoosier Energy, that was June 2nd, 1990. What were you doing on June 2nd, 1990?
Well, the crazy thing, we'd finished up, spent the afternoon finishing that stuff up, and we had planned for a celebration for the next day. And we were doing a hog roast at First Baptist Church. We had a hog on a spit in the backyard at the church, and we were going to be sitting there all night turning a hog. All of a sudden the skies went crazy, and I heard the tornado. Just luckily enough, my family had come to the church we were going to be singing songs all night, and I said, as we're turning, I heard the tornado, and told everybody to get into the basement, and tornado came through, and I ended up running I told my family, you all stay here, and ran up to the police station and knew that they would need some help. Of course, I had graduated from the law enforcement academy, so I'd had some of that disaster training and been through another tornado in Rush County when I was a police officer there. And it was sort of crazy. As I rounded the corner, Dixie Scales was screaming, because they had an old lock on the door upstairs that was triggered by electronics. Well, all the electricity was gone. She was locked in there, and she was screaming, "Bill's dead, Bill's dead." He'd been on the south side of town watching for a tornado, as an early warning, and I think he ended up with a tree or a telephone pole came through the
car,
through the patrol car, and I ran up and busted the door open, and Dixie was going crazy. Of course, the radio was going crazy too, the police radio. And since I had training, I said, "Dixie, sit down," and I started taking calls on the radio. And the IDAC system, which was state police, I put out a call and asked all departments to send EMS units and fire and rescue to the town as quickly as they could, because we'd had a tornado. When I went up, the hardware store across the street was down, the lot still empty. And
my first phone call was to Dixie, to dispatch, and I said, "Dixie, what's going on?" Because I still had phone service.
Yeah.
Had that old landline in my apartment. She answered, and she said, "Randy," she said, "I just watched the Handy Hardware collapse in front of my eyes, and I don't know where Bill is."
Yeah. For me, one of the fun, interesting things, I answered the phone, and there was a guy from AP Wire Service. Mm-hmm. And the guy said, I'd hear that you've had a tornado. Man, you guys just were declared a national disaster area with water, with a flood a couple weeks ago, and now you've got this tornado. He goes, "What's next?" And I says, "Well, let me tell you, my name is Pastor Jeff Stratton, and I've got it on good authority that it's frogs and locusts." and that appeared and of course that's a great quote, and that appeared in newspapers all across the country when they picked that story up. In fact, an old high school friend from 25 years before, he saw it, and was attributed to Pastor Jeff Stratton. He said there's only one Jeff Stratton who would come up with a line like that, and we reconnected and are still connected now. But it was all because of that little quote,
that little quip.
Yeah. What's next? Well, on good authority, it's frogs and locusts.
What happened next? Round that evening out for us.
Oh man, for me, of course, state police came. Dixie, Bill was able to foot it into the police department. And he was Dixie got better and took over the radio. I came downstairs, and there was a state police sergeant standing in the middle of the street, and I started throwing 2x12s from the hardware store out of the road, and he asked me who I was, what I did, told him I had some police experience, and he said, I'm going to give you 20 firemen, and I want you to organize a house-to-house search on the south side of town. He said, do you know how to mark for, an empty structure or entrapment? And so we went in, the city map was on the wall, and I took it off and sort of marked it up and said, okay, you take this street, you take this street. And not too long after that, the fire chief came up and he says,
Phil Taylor.
Phil said, what are you doing? And I said, hey, I was just ordered to do this by state police sergeant. And he goes, this is my job. And I said, that's great, but his gun is bigger than your hose, so I'm going to keep doing this job. And
Phil was worn out. At that time, before the tornado, he was worn out from organizing all of the efforts to haul the water up to that water tower.
Yeah, and that was. I think everybody was wore out, but we were able to kick it into another gear, and it was a special time.
The mayor. Did you see Jack that night?
No, I did not.
He was having some health issues.
He was having some health issues. Ended up at Vincennes Hospital, and the biggest way that I got, of course, Sunday rolled along, and
this was a Saturday night.
This was a Saturday night,
June 2nd, 1990.
And I got our church folks to keep turning the hog by hand. So,
still worried about that feast.
Well, I was, but I knew that was going to be the only warm food in town the next day. And with that whole hog, we'd be able to feed hundreds of people. We already had the buns and potato salad, and we had a freezer there. And so I said, put it in the freezer, close the door, and don't open it.
You did not have electricity.
We did not have electricity. But I knew that what was in the freezer, if they kept the door closed, that the potato salad would still be okay the next day. And as it was, we served hundreds of volunteers the next day with that hog and potato salad and potato chips.
The moose and the VFW. The moose was pretty well. They both fed volunteers.
They did, and of course now it took them 24 hours to get geared up, and both of them. I mean, they fed volunteers then for weeks. But that Sunday afternoon, I'd gone home. Our home was in the middle of it, and it was such a mess.
You were on South 10th Street?
South 10th Street. And, the elementary school was right behind us. Mm-hmm. And I packed up Gail and the kids and put them in the car and sent them to Fort Wayne to her mom and dad's house. And Gail said, what are you going to do? I said,
you'll figure it out.
I'm going to help. Yeah. And later on, it was interesting when, we met Dan Quayle, and my youngest daughter, Katie, was going into kindergarten the next year, and she asked him a question, where will I go to kindergarten? And he said, I promise you'll have a kindergarten. But the night before they started kindergarten, the newspaper reporter who had been here and reported that the next, on Monday morning, or on the Thursday morning after he was here, he called right before school and said, can I talk to your daughter? I said, well, what do you want to talk to my daughter about? I said, well, I want to ask her about school. So, he talked to her, and it was yes, no. I mean, she's 5 years old. And finally, to get her talking, he says, well, tell me, what does your daddy do? And this is in the newspaper article. My 5-year-old daughter answered, my daddy helps people. And that became the mantra for me for the next 30 years or 25,
or
30
more,
years of ministry is I want to live up to what my 5-year-old daughter thinks my world is about, and that's helping people. And it was a great time to be able to help people.
Oh my, it was everywhere.
It was.
You were talking about Vice President Quayle coming in. Late night TV beat him up, but gee, I liked him, and he was responsive to us. He was right here. One of my favorite stories of that, you'll remember this, Bob Riedel.
Yep.
Met with him. Bob Riedel had recently retired from IPNL.
Yeah.
He was their general superintendent, general manager, whatever, and very, very capable, intelligent person.
Yep.
And his buddy Jack Kinman said, "Can you step in and help out?" And so Bob came in as deputy mayor.
Right.
During that aftermath of the tornado.
During his convalescence from his heart issues, yeah. Did a great job.
Oh, yeah. He
probably did a better job than Jack would have.
He tried to train me and get me prepared for mayor, and he did he was very intelligent.
Yeah.
We were very blessed to have him helping.
Yeah.
But he met with Dan Quayle, and he said, he said, Vice President, we have met before. And he said, really? He said, IPNL, you came for a tour when you were running for Senate. And the Vice President said, I bet you never thought I'd be Vice President. He said, I never thought you'd be Senator.
Well, their advanced people asked to meet with me and they had me put together the group that would meet him because we met in the basement of the Moose, and it was interesting. He wanted to meet with me when he came. I provided a list, and of course they did their background checks. And I told the advanced guy for Quayle, I said, 4 of the 12 people I'm going to invite are my 3 kids and my wife, because this will be the only opportunity they get to sit in a room with the vice president. And the guy said, okay, I get it. And we did have 13 there because Elmer booked walked in and nobody would tell him no, that he couldn't come in.
the old man.
The old Elmer.
You don't tell Elmer no.
No, you never, not in Pike County, you didn't tell Elmer no. But we met beforehand back in the back room where the pool tables were in the basement of the Moose, and he took his tie tack off. I still have it. He took his tie tack off and gave it to me.
Dan Quayle.
He said, this will be a sort of a memento for you. And then he gave me his card, turned around and wrote his direct line on. He said, now, you're going to run into red tape. And if you get to some red tape that you can't bust through, you call my office and I'll see what I can do. And I didn't need to call him about the recovery stuff.
Boy, that was insurance, though, wasn't it?
But I did call him a few years later when I wanted to do a recovery project for Hurricane Katrina. And when I called the number, of course, he wasn't there, but it was the same number. It goes, went right into the office of the vice president. And after the gal, sort of incredulous who I was, I told her how I got the number, and I wanted a letter from the vice president getting me past I-10, which was, they had closed the Gulf Coast after Katrina, to get me past I-10 and the National Guard that was there, because I was looking for a place to establish a recovery program. And they faxed it to me about 3 hours later, and I drove down, and the National Guard let me, I show them the letter, they call in, let me through, and we did a 3-year project after Katrina that had about 11,000 volunteers come through to help in the area.
You seem to be in the right place at the right time when disaster strikes.
Well, I did get my nickname. I've had 2 nicknames in my life. One was I became Reverend Revolver when I was town marshal in Moores Hill, Indiana. Broke a gun case, and I got that nickname. But the Channel 14 started calling me the Pastor of Disaster.
Funny.
And part of that was, after all of this stuff, I went to, in October, an International Optimist Convention in Southern California, and lo and behold, the Big Bear earthquake, 7.4, happened, and somebody at the station said, "Man, we need to talk to somebody local." And I had become friends with the general manager at WFIE, and he said, "Well, Jeff Stratton's out there. Let's see if we can get a hold of him." And since they had my picture from all the tornado stuff, I was their correspondent one night. They put my picture in the corner, so I got to report for Channel 14 for the earthquakes in Southern California.
Wow.
And that was, and by the way, it was David James and Ann Comas were on that night. And after it was done, I didn't know this because, they'd signed me off, but somebody made a copy of it for me. But after they signed off, David James says, "You know what? Next time I go to Florida, I'm going to call and check and see if Jeff's going to be there because I don't want to have to go through a hurricane." He said that on the air about me. So yeah, it was an interesting time.
This program is sponsored in part by the Log Inns Farm, Bed, and Breakfast, just 3 miles west of Petersburg off of State Road 56. It's peaceful, quiet, and you're surrounded by nature in a traditional farm environment. It's nestled in the countryside of a southern Indiana working farm growing grain, hay, and livestock. It incorporates 2 vintage log cabins. Call the Log Inns Farm Bed and Breakfast at 812-354-2192. Recently, the real estate market has been unpredictable, but the sun is shining, spring has sprung, and at Harris Real Estate, we have clients looking for homes and properties to buy and sell. Let us help you. Real estate is local. We are local. We know the business. We know the community. Harris Real Estate has listed and sold hundreds of properties right here. We know Pike County. Harris Real Estate, 812-380-1065. Spring is here, and it's time to get winter off of your vehicle. When you wash your vehicle on a regular basis, there are many advantages. You're easier to see, you preserve the life of your vehicle, help maintain its value, enhances vision, and it just looks better. And washing with a wand, you can get into those crevices underneath, brush with a soft bristle brush, and then hose it off. Stop by Petersburg Car Wash today, 401 South 9th Street, Petersburg. Keep it clean. So back in Petersburg. The aftermath of the tornado. You were right in the midst of it.
Yeah, Monday night, at the council meeting, I went to the council and I stood up and said, guys, I've been through this before, and you've got all these groups in here, and the Red Cross, they've taken over, and they're going to leave in a week or two, and we're not going to have any of their contacts. We're going to be all in this all by ourselves. Because I went through this in Rush County when I was on the police department there, and we've got to take a hold of this. We can run this if we want to. And that's when Lowell Garland said, "Well, you gonna put up or shut up?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, if you've been through this before, how about we appoint you a disaster relief chairman?" And okay, and I had no idea what that would mean exactly, but. Everything ended up running through First Baptist Church and my office. We established a distribution system with all the buildings, the big buildings, especially churches. I remember, the Main Street Christian Church was where we sent all the baby stuff, all the diapers and baby food and anything that had to do with babies went there. Food was handled. Canned goods and that kind of thing was handled at First Pres. But then when people would come to 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 the central First Baptist and said, I need this, we could say, well, go here, and that way everybody could get it. We knew where all the stuff was instead of all just being piled all over the place. The other thing I think that was interesting, when I told the council that night, I said, well, I'm going to call all these groups together on Wednesday morning, and we're just going to take hold of this. And so we had the Mennonite Disaster Services, Red Cross, Salvation Army, Church United. There were 15, 20 different organizations here, and we sent runners and said that we're having a meeting of all of the disaster relief agencies that are here on Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. We want you to be there. And I introduced myself and said, the city has named me disaster relief chairman, and I want all of you. And I'd put down a list of about 20 different actions that I knew had to be done, like, for rebuilding and debris removal and yada, yada, yada. I mean, and said, and these were all volunteer agencies, by the way, that came in. They weren't under the FEMA umbrella. And I said, okay, I want all of you to pick one thing and do it better than you've ever done before. And there was one church group, I think it was Presbyterian churches. The guy said, well, we do A, B, and C. I said, well, pick one of them because that's all you're going to do, and you're going to do it better than you've ever done it anywhere else. And he said, well, if we can't do all three, then we'll leave. I said, well, then have a great day. And it was interesting because everybody else then said, well, okay, because I'd had it on a blackboard.
We'll take that.
We'll take that one. We'll take this one. We'll take this one. And the Presbyterian guy came back in about 15 minutes later and said, what's left? And they stayed. Another interesting thing that happened that day, we called all the ministers in from the Ministerial Association.
This is on Monday.
This is on Tuesday.
Okay.
And I said, guys, I don't know about you, but I've gotten calls from my higher ups, and they're going to send some one great hour of sharing money to us. Said, instead of us just frittering it away, how about we all get together and pool the monies that come in and do something really big here. And we had handshake agreements, and as it turned out, we ended up building 9 homes through the Ministerial Association. For a lot of them were families that had that were rentals. A lot of them are down around where the old Moose was, 4th, 5th Street, and that turned out that turned into a good project. It was
Petersburg's incarnation of Habitat for Humanity.
That's right. The interesting thing there, we bought a backhoe to do all of our own underground work, and then I realized once we got it here that none of the ministers, I was the only one who knew how to run a backhoe. So I spent a lot of time on a backhoe several months later. But then when we sold that backhoe, and that backhoe was used out at Prides Creek Golf Course to do a lot of work out there. But when we sold that backhoe, we took that money and built our last home. And so that was an interesting program. And one of the fun things, we took applications and interviewed families about homes. And there was one family, we brought them in and said, we're going to build you a home. They had property out near Prides Creek, and they were sort of dejected. I said, we just said we're gonna give you $50,000 toward a house. Each of them had to be able to pay for the materials, and we would do all the underground work, heating and cooling. There was a list of things we would pay for, and then things that they would have to supply. And this particular lady said, well, we always dreamed about having a log home out here. And she walked out, and I looked at one of the guys. I said, well, let's see if we can build her a log home. And and there were, at that time in the Press Dispatch, there were ads running for log home dealerships. And I and 3 other pastors, Jay Litherland was one of them, Bill Deach, Father Bill Deach, we drove down to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and talked to them about getting a log cabin distributorship. And the deal was you put 10,000 up, and the first one you buy, you get 5,000 back. The second one that you buy and sell, you get 5,000 back, and then you have a dealership that's worth 10 grand. And so we knew we were going to get 5 grand back because we wanted to build one of those. So we signed on the dotted line and bought a log home distributorship. And that was why we built the one house down at 5th and Locust, a log house,
Right.
so we could get the other 5,000 back, and then sold the log dealership to a guy up in Davies County for 8 grand, and used that 8 grand to do other work here in the community.
It all worked out.
Yeah, and those are some of the stories of some of the backdoor things that happened that a lot of people never ever knew that had happened.
You're reminding me of stuff that I had forgotten.
Also, remember we had the telethon. Channel 14 had a
Yes.
telethon in our sanctuary at First Baptist, and one of the things that we decided, the Disaster Relief Committee, we wanted to do things to bring the city back to where it was, and one of the first things we did, and we got a lot of hassle for this, we bought 16 different hardwood species trees that were 2-inch calipers, and hired, who was our local nursery?
Potting shed?
The potting shed. Hired the potting shed to plant them and mulch them and water them twice a month for 4 months for during the summer, and so that we could replace all those beautiful trees that we lost. And we had a lot of people, complain because everybody who owned a lot could get 2 trees, and they had to and they had to plant them in their they had to plant them for street trees, and got a lot of like I said, a lot of hassle for that. But about 15, 16 years later, I was back here to do a funeral, and one of the people that had been complained really loudly came up to me at the funeral and said, now when I look at the south end of Petersburg, it almost looks like this thing didn't go through here. And I didn't understand the whole tree thing, but I want to thank you for doing that, and apologized for giving me so much grief. I think the other thing that we did that was really important, because we had to go through the council to approve everything, the city council. We recommended that we do a cash distribution to individuals who built back in Petersburg. Because one of the things that I talked with the mayor about, I said, I don't know if you realize this or not, but we're going to lose tax base. If homes aren't, because we were seeing a lot of people taking insurance money and building outside of town. And I said, if we don't find some way to bring people back in here, our tax base is going to be a mess in a few years. And
that was what prompted the trailer ordinance.
That's exactly right.
And then out of that trailer ordinance, which they did not want mobile assessment.
Right.
They wanted permanent.
Right.
So that's what sparked that. And then the trailer ordinance that was hastily done was redefined and restructured in the comprehensive zoning.
But if you remember, we did a thing. I mean, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars in that fund, and anybody who built a home back in the city limits, we gave them $10,000 cash toward building that home. But we only gave it to them after they started the home. after they got a permit. We didn't give them money
until they had skin in the game.
Until they had skin in the game, and they'd already had money in the ground. And we got a lot of hassle for that too, because and if you built within a quarter mile of town, we gave you $4,000. And but there were people that built way out in the country, and they came and said, we lost our home. We think that we should get X number of dollars. And we said, sorry, but we're protecting Petersburg for the future. And we took a little heat for that, but
did what you thought was right.
Did what I thought was right. And it helped that my uncle was a Superior Court judge, if they went to court. So
back up on that. You did not grow up here.
I did not.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Fort Wayne. But I'd visited Pike County for my whole life.
Your aunt and uncle were here.
They were. When my uncle got out of law school, he interviewed with Carl Gray, and Carl brought him in as a junior partner, and he ended up in charge after Carl passed, and actually he became judge before Carl passed.
81, 82, I think.
Yeah. And that was there were an awful lot of people here because of my name and because of my uncle who thought I had grown up here. Mm-hmm. Of course, my two cousins did, Mike and Charlie, and I never would lie, but I would play on that anytime I could. But yeah, it was once again some of those little extra things we did. One story that I really love too, that I don't think a lot of people have ever heard. I was in a meeting with the FEMA folks, and this was a guy that I had joked with a few weeks earlier and said, I've got a solution to tornadoes hitting little towns. And he said, what's that? I said, have you ever noticed on the news, there's always some lady in an old house dress picking through a mobile home? I think we ought to have mobile home decoys here in the Midwest. And he looked at me like he thought I was crazy, but I was.
That was okay.
But we were in a meeting a couple of weeks later, and he kept talking about what are we going to do with this hazardous waste? What are we going to do with hazardous waste? And they kept referring to the hardware store. And finally, I realized, I said, paint. I said, are you talking about paint? He goes, yeah. He said, we're trying to get an EPA order so we can dispose of this hazardous waste. I said, why don't you just give the paint to me? And he said, what are you going to do with it? I said, we're going to paint stuff. And, all the homes that we built with the Ministerial Association, they were all painted with paint from the hardware store, all the stuff out at the park, because I was on the park board as well.
It was stored in the basement of City Hall.
It was stored in the basement of City Hall, but when we got to a point, we moved a bunch of it out to the barn at the city park, about the same time as we moved the park superintendent's house. IP&L gave us a house, and when we paid to have the house moved.
I think I've got a picture of you and me and Cy Ashley and a couple others.
Yep. And an interesting story there, I used that backhoe I told you about to put in the septic system for that house out there, and to put the electric lines in. And I happened to hit a 50,000 volt line that went through the yard to go back to the fairgrounds. And boy, I tell you what, our RAMC guy came out. He was hollering, and I said, "Whoa, wait a minute! You're going to pay for this." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Let me see those flags up there and those flags there. Where are the flags from your locator service right here, where I just almost died because?" And his tone totally changed after he realized, we had locator, but their locator service had not located. They'd missed the main line for the fairgrounds at the back end of the park. But we got that moved in, and it was, the other thing that, if everybody remembers, we rebuilt with the apprentice program, we designed and built
Gary Kinnaman.
Gary Kinnaman. I went to Gary, and Gary said, "Oh, that'd be a great way for my apprentices to learn." And we had met through Channel 14, designed it for us, and bought all the materials, and they built it. And I remember we had all those trees moved. Learned a lot about moving trees. They had one of those big diggers that would, go under the ball, scoop it up, and they'd go out and they'd dig a spot. Then they'd go back with the digger, dig the tree, and put it in. But we had to use one of the things that we learned was you had to orient the tree the
same direction
as So we made a mark pointing toward the IPL towers. So we
knew where to set it.
So we knew where to set it. We just put a little chalk mark on the tree when there were several farmers that we cleared volunteer trees and replanted, probably 60 trees out there. And that came out of disaster relief monies.
Wow. You are perpetual motion. You're still like that, aren't you?
Well, yeah, but pretty much.
So how long did you stay in Pike County? How long were you in Petersburg?
We were in Petersburg for almost 11 years.
So 89 until almost 2000?
Yes. Yep. And, my last 4 years here, I wasn't pastoring. I had actually, soon after, sort of got burnt out because I
understand why.
Had to continue being a pastor, but I was offered a position in the By administration to do a Governor's Commission for Drug-Free Indiana, headquartered at the University of Evansville.
I forgot that. I remember it now.
Yeah, and said yes. And
you eventually went back into ministry, didn't you?
I did, and in between when the By administration went away,
transitioned over, yeah.
And I went to work for Mike Elliott at National City Bank.
Okay.
For a few years as a commercial lender for Mike. And it was funny. I said, Mike, I don't know anything about banking. He said, well, if you can sell eternity, you can sell banking services. And I turned into a wonderful few years. I worked for them, but had an experience that happened there. And Mike, actually, he made a comment one day, and he had asked me to go talk to a family who just lost a child, an employee at the bank. And I said, Mike, I really think that's your job. I'll go with you. And he says, well, Jeff, you're the bank's pastor. And I went home that night and I said, Gail, how is it my boss knows that I'm a pastor and I don't? And it's funny, less than a week later, my old area minister called and said, I got a project that I'd like you to think about doing. And I said, Posey, it's interesting that you would call because this has happened and I know I need to be back in ministry. So, yeah, I did a sojourn of about 6 years away from ministry, but it all worked out really good.
What was your assignment after you left the bank?
I merged two little churches on the east side of Evansville, Eastern Heights and East Side Baptist Church. We merged them into one church, American Baptist East. And over the course of my almost 10 years there, we grew that church to 3 services. We started with about 80 members and ended up with about 800 members, and a lot of good things happened there.
I remember when that was going on. We always kind of stayed in touch.
Yeah, we have. Michael W. Smith had an old song, "Friends are friends forever if the Lord's the Lord of them, and friends will not say never because the welcome will not end." I always loved your heart because you loved Pike County and I loved Pike. I still love Pike County. When the last time they bought new Christmas decorations, I for years had an online version of the Press Dispatch, and when it came out that they were buying new Christmas ornaments, I, of course,
got involved.
I got involved, and my family bought one of the Christmas ornaments, and for the pole, the big ones, and we still donate to Pike County activities, and First Baptist Church is remembered in our will. So when we everybody's worth more dead than alive, so that'll.
Speaking of donations, do you remember not long after we were hit, a year or two, probably 2, maybe 3 years, Petersburg, Virginia was hit.
And we collected money and drove all the way to Petersburg, Virginia.
You and Jack and Jerry Church.
Yeah.
Myself.
It was, and that was a wonderful visit. You know, we got to go on the set of James Earl Jones's. He was doing a TV show. Remember, we pulled up to a
right. And they were sitting on the courthouse square. He was in suspenders.
Well, that was when we went to see him after we asked the mayor if she could get us on. But remember, we pulled into town.
Mayor Rosalind Dance.
Yeah, we were stopped by a police officer, and all of a sudden, here comes this old vintage pickup, and in the back was James Earl Jones and a little boy sitting on a bale of hay, and they were shooting a scene of it. We had no idea that they were doing that. But, we took that check to him. I still have my key to the city of Petersburg, Virginia.
I've got one somewhere. It might be in that case behind you.
Yeah, I showed that to my granddaughter not too long ago, and I said, I'm a Eusta. And she said, "What's a Eusta?" I said, "I used to be somebody."
So I used to tell the girls when they were into princesses and things that Pocahontas, that was her dad's area. That was her their territory. What is now Petersburg, Virginia.
And I didn't know this, but since I moved to Indianapolis, I got involved in genealogy. Most of my relatives didn't have teeth, and I was the second person to graduate from high school in my family. But we found out that in the research and that I had patriots in my family. I've perfected several 7 and 8 generation grandpas who fought in the Revolutionary War, and so I became president of Central Sons of the American Revolution several years ago. But also in genealogy, found out that my family goes back to 1620 in Jamestown. A fellow by the name of John Cordray, who moved in or came as an indentured servant. He was across the James River from Jamestown and was killed in the massacre of 1622 by the Powhatan Indians. His sons, who were on the other side of the river working on a different plantation as indentured servants, lived and ended up, one of them married a gal who had been a lady in Ireland. And also found out that one of my relatives, this on my mom's side, the Stratton family they were always good folk, but my mom's side of the family are questionable. But found out that one of my ancestors, Peter Waltz, was one of the original 81 guys that spilled out of the tavern at Lexington Green and started the Revolutionary War. And I joke now that my family's been starting bar fights ever since. So, and there's more truth to that than you'd want to know.
What is life like today for Gail and Jeff Stratton?
Well, I retired a little early than I expected to. Gail,
are you 64, 65?
No, I'm 69. I'll be 70 in September.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. But 4 years ago, Gail contracted a really bad case of breast cancer, and had to go through some real harsh treatment and surgeries, and so I retired to get her back and forth and taking care of her. It was tough for 18 months, 2 years, and she's better, and but I found that it's not hard to fall in love again, and we spend 6 months out of the year in Indianapolis, and we were able to purchase her grandparents. Her grandparents built a cottage 15 miles south of Mackinac City on a lake called Larks Lake, and we have expanded that, and we live there 6 months out of the year. I always say it's not heaven, but it's in the same zip code as heaven, and it'll stay in our family. Of course, I'm also the president of the Larks Lake Association, and on the board of a couple of northern Michigan environmental groups, and have gotten pretty involved in that community as well. And we'll be going back up in about 10 days. I got real involved with them after their big ice storm last year. It was a horrible ice storm that came through the area that took down 50,000 acres of trees, but I guess I sort of do find my way to disasters here or there. But if you look, they're all over the place.
Oh,
one other thing, Randy, something happened to me, and you'll not remember this, but we were walking down Main Street not too long after the tornado. We were going to a meeting somewhere, and I reached and I said to you, there was some litter on the ground, and I said, somebody ought to do something about this, and you said, well, how about we become somebody? And from that day on, I've used that to whenever from that day on, there in the summer of 1990, I've used that as sort of a mantra. When I, in my head, say somebody ought to do something about that, I become somebody. So I want to smack you upside the head because I've ended up being somebody way too many times. But I want to thank you for saying that and prompting me that day, because it's become one of the mantras of my life.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
You're too kind.
It's just true. It's just true.
The kids, how are the kids today?
Kids are great. We have 6 grandkids.
Wow.
Well, actually, I always tell people we have 5 grandkids and a Graham. My Graham is about the same level as my Jay was. Jay was a handful as a little boy, but in fact,
is Graham Jay's?
Graham is Jay's boy. April, who should have, when we moved, she was a senior in high school, and I forget when we told them we were going to be moving to Evansville, because I was working in Evansville, Gail was working in Evansville, and of course with the time change, we'd get home way too late, and too much stuff was going on at the big old house out near Pike Central, and we told them we need to move. They asked, why are we moving? I says, well, you're going to get to the age pretty soon where you're looking for you're going to be looking for a mate, and we got to get you out of this gene pool. And Jay looked at me. He says, Dad, we're the only chlorine in this pool. But April is she's an executive with Abbott Labs in Chicago. Jay is a vice president for Salesforce in Indianapolis. Katie is a master's level occupational therapist managing home health agencies down in Nashville, Tennessee.
That's little 5-year-old Katie.
That's little 5-year-old Katie. And she and they all are happily married, wonderful mates. The kids are all doing great. April's oldest, Emmett, was on a state championship math team in the state of Illinois last weekend. So Pike County did really well to start them off. This is really where our kids got their start, and they all have graduated. They graduated from college with high honors. Kelly School of Business. Katie with a master's. I said a master's, and won 3 of 4 awards that USI gave to occupational therapists and her at the end of her occupational therapy program. But they were Pike. It was Pike County Schools that started these kids off where they were, and I just we have a great school system. I loved being involved at Pike Central. I coached high school tennis there for several years, and 8th grade girls basketball, chaperoned I don't know how many dances, refereed basketball and baseball there, and
Coach tennis here.
Yeah, coach. I was Brent Beck's tennis coach.
Okay.
Someday you have to ask Brent about me taking him the fall of 1990 to the World Series with the Cincinnati Reds against the Oakland A's. I took Brent as my captain to the 2 games that we had over at Cincinnati. The first 2 games, of course, the Reds swept out in Oakland, and we couldn't go back for the. But I got those tickets from the guy who owned JTM Meats, Johnny T. Maas, who I'd met in Moores Hill, where I came from.
Wow.
I coached his grandson in Little League baseball.
Wow.
And got to go with him to Johnny Bench's induction into the Hall of Fame. So
that was 88, maybe?
Yeah, it was 88. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good stuff.
You have fun, don't you?
Randy, I tell people all the time, if everybody had the life I have, there'd be no wars. God has been so good.
A lot of disasters.
A lot of disasters, but no wars. Good catch. God's been good to us, and we've worked hard. The 3 parts of my body that I've had to replace will tell you that I've
put a little too much stress on those parts.
I put a lot of stress. Had an episode about 10 weeks ago where my heart stopped 5 times. Turned out to be an electrical issue, and they put a pacemaker in, and now I'm electrically enhanced and picked up a couple strokes on the golf course. So
$6 million man.
Yeah, well, I wish it was $6 million. It's probably more than that, but we've got a great life.
$1975.
That's right, 1975, the $6 million man.
Well, I've had you on my list for quite a while, and just proximity never. But John Craig said something the other day, and he said you really need to get Jeff on there. So I just took that cue and sent you a message, and here we are.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, it was fun meeting up with John last year, tailgating at IU for IU football, and it was lots of fun. Saw a lot of Pike County folks, and John's brother-in-law. I pastored Byron when I was at American Baptist East. I did his and Holly's wedding.
Great.
But yeah, I still keep in contact with a lot of Pike County folks, and in a lot of ways, Pike County is sort of home to us. We love Pike County.
You had a big impact here, and Pike County had a big impact on you.
Oh my, yeah. It's funny. I went out to Walnut Hill to say hi to some of my old friends before I came down early to. I do that all the time because I want to say hi to some old friends out there, and I thought as I drove through, this might be a good place to for my last spot. So that would work for me. So my Aunt Barbara is still alive.
Great.
She's in Shreveport with my cousin Mike, who's a colorectal surgeon. I think he's going to be retiring here pretty soon. But she's doing great. She's the last one of that generation above us.
We're next.
Yeah, we are next, and that's okay. That's just the way the world rolls.
I assume I'll always be working, shaking that coffee cup to the desk like the old man on Pawn Stars.
Yeah. I guess we could call you the old man. And then the video you sent when you realize you look at some of those videos from back then, all those wonderful people that I said hello to some of them today. We have a great heritage in Pike County. There's We stand on the shoulders of some really, really special people
Strong
here in
people.
Pike County.
Too bad we didn't start this podcast a few years ago, but I do have audio tapes of most of them.
Yeah, and I've got some old VHS tapes that I probably need to get into a digital format.
That guy sitting over there will turn them in. We'll digitize them for you.
Well, we'll have to.
If
talk
he has
about
time. He's a busy guy too.
I bet.
Jeff, I love you, and I sure appreciate you coming down.
You too, Randy. Love you. Love Pike County.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this program of WFPC Podcasting. The program is brought to you by Hathaway Excavating and Rock Yard, Schultz Eye Care, the Log Ends Farm Bed and Breakfast, the Dustin Schnare Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance Agency, Harris Real Estate, and Petersburg Car Wash. Please thank our sponsors for their continued investment in Pike County. A new program appears each Friday on WFPC Podcasting, exploring the people, information, and news right here in Pike County. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching WFPC Podcasting, your local source for the heart and history of Pike County, Indiana. From backroads to town centers, we bring you the voices, stories, and news that shape our community. Join us on this journey through the past, present, and future of Pike County, Indiana. Tune in next week for the next episode of WFPC Podcasting.